a lot of people with reactive hypoglycemia, they have a stimulated insulin level, at the time they eat that refined or the high carbohydrate food, and then they tend to go down much quicker. They have more low blood glucose. So that's different from insulin resistance. With insulin resistance, you end up with a higher level of blood glucose. With reactive hypoglycemia, you end up with a lower level of blood glucose. And that feels different, and that can feel pretty terrible.
Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed this episode brought to you by Let's Get Checked. You can save 20% off your purchase by visiting tiyLGC.com/PCOS and using the code PCOS20 at checkout. Now I hope you enjoy the episode. Hello Kylie, welcome back to the PCOS Oracle podcast. I'm so excited to have you back. I really enjoyed the first episode we recorded with Cyrus, episode 47, I believe. So yeah, that was really awesome. We were talking about insulin resistance and how food can be used as medicine to help, reverse insulin resistance, all forms of diabetes. So now in this episode, we'll be delving a little bit more deeper into the link between insulin resistance and PCOS, what you can do to reverse the symptoms and help balance your hormones for this specific type of PCOS. Because as we know, there's multiple types of PCOS. It's not just one condition. They don't all have the same type, the same hormone imbalance, the same symptoms. So this will be focused predominantly on just insulin resistance. Mm-hmm. So I'm glad to have you back, and I'm excited to delve into this episode because it's not the most common type of PCOS. Around 70% of women with PCOS suffer from insulin resistance. So I guess we can just now go into what is the link with insulin resistance and PCOS. What's the influence? How are they connected?
Sure. So yeah, I mean, insulin resistance is deeply connected to so many health conditions, and PCOS is one of them. And actually in our program, this is one of the conditions that we talk about frequently with our members, because a lot of women living with PCOS also get diagnosed with things like gestational diabetes if they become pregnant, or type 2 diabetes, and insulin resistance. So because we focus on insulin resistance at the root of all of the various forms of diabetes, we have a lot of women coming to us to talk about this topic. And it's really amazing because when you're reversing insulin resistance, we start to see women see major improvements in their A1C values. If you're checking your blood glucose or having that checked, you'll see improvements in your blood glucose values as well. And that's really important for your long-term health and for, managing symptoms of PCOS as well. So basically we have, when you're insulin resistant, some of the biomarkers that we look at, and we talked about this in the last episode, but just to review them, are blood pressure, cholesterol levels, A1C values, and fasting blood glucose values, as well as being at your ideal weight. So one of the things about insulin resistance is that it can show up inside the cells, and it actually, as insulin resistance continues and kind of increases over time, you'll end up storing fat inside the cells where it doesn't belong. So one way of seeing that is that you often will see excess weight, that you can see more visibly. And so as the adipose tissue is growing, the fat inside the cells is also growing. And so when you're carrying excess weight, that is one sort of external cue that insulin resistance is happening inside the cells. For a lot of women who are living with PCOS, they're also told to, if they're overweight, to lose weight to help manage the symptoms. And part of that is because if you're carrying excess weight and you have these other symptoms of insulin resistance, the insulin resistance is actually contributing to the symptoms and making your symptoms worse. So, that's why women are told frequently to lose weight as one of the ways to get improvement in blood glucose and in A1C values and in symptoms of PCOS. The really good news is that, just like we were talking about on the last episode too, and I know that, as we learn more and more and more about the benefits of plant-based nutrition, we also find there's so much information about plant-based, whole food plant-based eating being a significant way to improve your weight loss. If you are looking to lose weight, it reverses insulin resistance. It's the method that we use in our program, and we teach people how to adopt a low-fat plant-based whole food diet so that you bring the symptoms of your PCOS down, along with your A1C, fasting blood glucose, and potentially your weight too. So we work very closely with a lot of women who are living with PCOS. And, the things that we hear a lot are women who are, in particular, looking to maybe conceive or wanting to become pregnant or are pregnant, and they want to ensure the health of their pregnancy. So for a lot of women living with PCOS, infertility is one of the, can be part of the PCOS pathway. And so, if you're receiving fertility treatment, one of the things that physicians will recommend is to have your A1C less than 6.5. And when you're in an insulin resistant state, oftentimes that A1C goes up as well. And so what we do is we teach women how to adopt this program, adopt the low-fat plant-based diet, as well as some of our other tools. And they see huge improvement in insulin resistance. Weight starts to come off, A1C values start to improve, and blood glucose values improve. And so therefore, you not only have less expression of symptoms of PCOS, but also during pregnancy, you're less likely to develop gestational diabetes, less likely to have any complications from that during pregnancy as well. So it's really, it benefits so many parts of women's health. Like the low-fat plant-based whole food diet benefits so many areas of women's health and reproductive health. So it's really important that we continue to talk about that.
Yeah. I think it's so important to be paying attention to, your symptoms if you're experiencing insulin resistance, to prevent, it becoming type 2 diabetes, which is a huge risk factor among other risk factors associated with PCOS. So it's important to, what are some of the symptoms? Let's briefly touch on, in case our listeners don't know, what are some other symptoms? We know it's weight gain and difficulty losing weight. What other kind of symptoms might someone be experiencing as an indication that they might have to go to the doctor and get their A1C test, their oral glucose tolerance test? What kind of symptoms would they be experiencing?
That's a really good question. So a lot of times people experience things like headaches, brain fog, pain sometimes, or tingling in fingers or toes or in parts of your extremities. Those are all symptoms of high blood glucose. And when blood glucose levels start to elevate, even sort of the other symptom that comes up a lot is sort of this a little bit of jitteriness. That's a really common sort of low grade, high blood glucose symptom. And what happens is over the course of time, as insulin resistance progresses, your blood glucose will start to slightly elevate and slightly elevate and slightly elevate, and to the point where you're living with, pretty constant elevation in blood glucose. And that's where you can get some of these symptoms. The brain fog is another one. That's something that people say they just can't, it's like they feel like they're moving through fog. They can't really, really wake up in the beginning of the day. It's very difficult to wake up. Lethargy, fatigue, headaches, these are all very common symptoms. And those are good reasons to, talk with your doctor and find out, like you mentioned, which tests to take so that you learn about not just your blood glucose value, but your A1C is actually a measurement of, it's an average of your last 3 months worth of your blood glucose. So that's why A1C is really important, because it gives you a longer range picture of what your blood glucose has been doing. And that's a way to measure your level of insulin resistance.
Yeah, I feel the brain fog and the fatigue is one of these big symptoms. I feel that, and also craving of carbs and sugary kind of stuff. And that's why often when your blood sugar goes high, and then you end up, and it dips, and you end up craving more carbs to pick yourself back up again, and it's that whole cycle. Right. And then you're always fatigued.
Yes.
So is there a specific time that you should test your A1C? Or is it you can just go whenever? Because there's certain tests that you have to test at a certain time, or is there for that one? I don't know.
Yeah, so usually when you get blood work done, it's best to get it done in a fasted state. So no food for 8 hours prior to the test is a standard recommendation. And A1C is like that. Same with fasting blood glucose value. If you haven't eaten for 8 to 10 hours, that's the range of what sort of constitutes a fasting blood glucose, because you want to get that number when you're in your sort of most still metabolic state. And when you first wake up in the morning, that's a good time to have these your fasting blood glucose checked, because you've been sleeping, it's, you haven't been doing a lot of activity, you haven't been eating, and it's easier to get that level checked at that point of the day.
Okay. And the other thing is, we mentioned how weight gain is very a common symptom of insulin resistance, but on the other hand, there's lean PCOS, where women are, not overweight, they're quite thin, skinny, and whatever you want to call it. So I feel like this is the thing sometimes with women with PCOS tend to get underdiagnosed because that whole weight is like the stereotypical kind of idea of what a woman with PCOS should look like. They have to be overweight or obese or something. And I feel like women who are lean and they have PCOS, don't get diagnosed because of this one little thing. So that one tends to be like, it could be like reactive hypoglycemia or something like that. So with that one, what kind of, with this lean PCOS and reactive hypoglycemia, what kind of symptoms would they be experiencing? And are the tests the same for this type of insulin resistance, blood sugar imbalance? Is it the same?
That's a really good question. And just to clarify, somebody who's lean and doesn't carry excess body fat in their adipose tissue, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not insulin resistant, because you can still be storing fat inside your cells, which is what insulin resistance is. And so if you're somebody who's eating a high fat diet and you're not carrying excess, kind of the visible weight, the adipose tissue weight, or you're not carrying excess fat there, you may not see it. And you may think, well, I'm at my ideal weight. I'm maybe under my weight my ideal weight. And that doesn't mean that you're not necessarily insulin resistant as well, or that you couldn't develop insulin resistance, because that's all inside the cells. You can't see that form of insulin resistance until you get your blood work checked. So that's a really good question. So I would still, the same blood values apply from what we define insulin resistance as. So it would be, and that's why we say being at your ideal weight, because that means it's not about just weight loss. It could be, for some women, even learning how to gain weight to get to their ideal body weight. And so we say ideal body weight is one. Sort of, if you were to look at your overall insulin sensitivity, if you're at your ideal body weight, then that's maybe a lower level of insulin resistance. Have your cholesterol levels checked. Elevated cholesterol, triglycerides, LDL cholesterol, those are all indicators of insulin resistance. So if you're somebody in this category, you can have your cholesterol level checked. You can have your blood pressure checked to make sure that's within range. Have your A1C and fasting blood glucose would also be important for them to have those checked to understand if there's a baseline insulin resistance. Now, with the reactive hypoglycemia, that's a different sort of set of tests that you would want to have checked. One test that we recommend for all the people in our program is to have your C-peptide level checked. And this is different than an insulin test. It's different than a glucose tolerance test. C-peptide level it's a protein that's released at the time that insulin is released from your pancreas. Sometimes anybody who's experiencing a reactive hypoglycemia could have some variation in their C-peptide value. So it could be that your C-peptide is underproducing or overproducing, that your pancreas is overproducing or underproducing, and that would give you a higher or lower C-peptide value. So we would recommend having that number checked. The other thing you could do would be the glucose tolerance test that you mentioned earlier. That's a good way to check to see what happens when you're given, high carbohydrate glucose formula. It's, I think, 75 grams of glucose in a beverage. So it's a very quick introduction of glucose. And a lot of people with reactive hypoglycemia, they have a stimulated insulin level, at the time they eat that refined or that high carbohydrate food, and then they tend to go down much quicker. They have more low blood glucose. So that's different from insulin resistance. With insulin resistance, you end up with a higher level of blood glucose. With reactive hypoglycemia, you end up with a lower level of blood glucose. And that feels different, and that can feel pretty terrible.
Yeah, interesting. I'm glad we touched on that, because I feel like it's important to address like the lean kind of PCOS type, I guess you could say, because I feel like it doesn't get spoken enough about. So I like to touch on that as well, just to help and raise more awareness about that aspect. So I kind of want to ask, we mentioned in the previous episode, and we've touched on it, how fat is, can cause insulin resistance. Is there any other causes that people need to be aware of that they might be doing that they don't know that can cause insulin resistance?
Yeah. So right, the dietary fat is the key contributor. When it comes to blood glucose management, we look at first dietary fat. So first we recommend, reducing your dietary fat to 10 to 15% of your diet. And that's the very best way to begin reversing insulin resistance. But the other thing is that there are other foods that may not be high in fat, but they're high in refined sugars or refined products. So refined foods will cause more elevations in the short term in blood glucose. So maybe you're looking at, like, let's say, some sort of processed food, a bread or a cookie or something. You're like, well, it doesn't have any oil in it, so it must be okay. But unfortunately, when it comes to people who are, when you're dealing with blood glucose variability, a refined product, especially one made of refined sugar with flour, things like that, that can also cause challenges in managing your blood glucose. In particular for women with reactive hypoglycemia, the refined products can be more troublesome for them than any of the other food groups. So that's something that's very interesting. And so one of the things that we do when we work with women who have reactive hypoglycemia is we really try to help understand that, the difference between a fiber-rich food, like high carbohydrate food from fruit, let's say, which has lots of fiber, versus eating refined products that you get off of the shelf and, have lots of ingredients in them, especially refined flour, sugar, things like that. So that's a key point, is that carbohydrates are also all very different. And when you're looking at whole food versus refined food, they're also very, very different in terms of how your blood glucose is going to become affected by that.
I want to ask, do people, when in your program it's a plant-based diet, so do people notice any, because obviously it's very high fiber, and I feel like, do people feel any kind of, I don't know if I want to say side effects, but like symptoms of eating a very high fibrous diet?
Yeah, sometimes, well, especially like a stomach upset, right? Like you think about your digestion. And some people at the beginning of the program, especially if you're coming from a very low plant carbohydrate diet. So if you're coming from a high fat, maybe you've done a low carb diet in the past, you start adding in fiber rich foods from fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, all of these wonderful fiber rich foods. And you start adding them in, and there can be some stomach disruption at first. And that's largely associated with your gut microbiome. And it's a condition actually known as gut dysbiosis. And one of our friends who's a gastroenterologist, and he's a plant-based gastroenterologist, he actually just wrote a book called Fiber Fueled, and he talks all about that. And so what we recommend, and what's recommended for anybody starting to adopt a high fiber diet, is to start very slowly. And so one of the things, the way that we do our program is we do it one meal at a time. We do breakfast first, we start adding some fruits. They are very fiber rich, so it can cause a little bit of temporary discomfort. And then as you get more adjusted to it, as your gut microbiome heals and you develop stronger gut bacteria, the fiber is feeding the bacteria in your gut, which is why there can be some disruption initially. And then as you start to add more and more fiber rich foods and a variety of fiber from diverse whole foods, it can really improve. You will eventually see the improvement in your disruption, but it will also wildly impact your ability to digest food. You know, people report all the time like their digestion's never been better. The fiber really helps improve your digestion, as well as it feeds your gut microbiome, which is responsible for so much more than just digesting. So it's really, yeah, there can be some initial challenges, but usually they're gone within like 2 to 3 weeks for most people.
Because I remember when I was trying to, you know, not that my diet was really bad, but I tried to move to like a vegan diet. I tried to do it for like ethical reasons. I felt I wanted to give it a go. So I was doing that, and I just felt so bloated for like, I was just so uncomfortable, and I was like, I looked inflamed as well, and I was like, oh, this is really weird. This is like, doesn't seem right. But so I don't know, I had to cut back a bit because I eat a lot of, you know, I eat a lot of beans. I was eating tons of vegetables, and I was just like not feeling myself.
Yeah, one of the things that you can do to help with that, if you're making that change, is to steam your vegetables, because that was the same thing for me. I really struggled at the beginning of this, and raw greens especially were really hard for me, and I was eating a ton of beans at first. And until your gut really gets used to all of that additional fiber, it can take a minute. So, and it's a little uncomfortable at first, but it's a short-term transition that does go away, which is great.
Yeah, steaming them definitely is better because it breaks down some of those sugars as well. Because I feel like for me it was a lot more bad. Like it hit me worse because at that time I kind of just came off the birth control pill. This was like a couple of years ago. But obviously the whole birth control pill can affect your, kill off the good bacteria, and can cause all those problems. So I feel like that was probably a bad time to move to like a vegan diet where my whole gut was like just not ready for all of that. But I tried it. But yeah. So the other thing that a lot of people ask, and I remember when I was looking into all of this, is the whole glycemic index. It's like a big thing when looking into insulin resistance and diabetes and managing blood sugar levels. Is this something people should kind of obsess over? Because I feel like when this was like, when it first kind of came out and everyone was like glycemic index, focus on the GI index, everyone was really obsessing over it. Is this something people should focus a lot on? Is it, because obviously with the plant-based diet, you're predominant, it's fiber obviously, so the blood sugar levels, it helps with the release of to digestion, and it doesn't have that whole spike in blood sugar levels. But is it something people should focus on when they're trying to manage their blood sugar levels?
If you're eating a diet that's all whole food, then the glycemic index doesn't really apply, because like you said, the fiber that's in the food and the water that's in the food, if you're eating whole foods throughout the day, you're going to get so much fiber, so much water, and the combination of the two of those really helps to slow down the absorption of glucose, and it slows down the rise in blood glucose following a meal. There are certain foods that will cause more elevations in blood glucose, and so what we do is we sort of categorize foods into the high carbohydrate foods and low carbohydrate foods. So your low carbohydrate foods are your non-starchy vegetables, greens, mushrooms, berries, those types of foods. And you probably know, and they feel familiar in terms of like, high versus low carbohydrate. The others are grains like quinoa, rice tends to be a little bit more starchy. So the lower carbohydrate rich foods would go in that category. And then the higher carbohydrate rich foods, which are things like fruits, starchy vegetables, more of your grains, legumes, they tend to, especially at the beginning, cause a little bit more elevation in blood glucose. So what we do is we say mix, bring some of the foods together so you have maybe not a whole food with the high carbohydrate. And for some people, they actually start with just the low carbohydrate fruits and the lower, or in vegetables just for 2 weeks. So there's like almost like a stepping stone to get to all of the whole foods. But people who do that, if you're starting out and you're starting to eat some fruit and you're noticing your blood glucose is really affected, step back, add in more of the non-starchy vegetables and give that a try for a bit, and then start adding the other things back in a little bit more, slowly, one at a time.
All right, interesting. The other thing, obviously, with insulin resistance and high blood sugar levels, that obviously can have an effect on, there's another kind of type of PCOS called adrenal PCOS, which is like high cortisol. So in your program, or what are your kind of recommendations for people who are working on their blood sugar levels, and obviously if they're suffering from the constant high cortisol levels because they're constantly, those blood sugar levels are going high, triggering high cortisol levels, what's the kind of recommendations in that regards?
Yeah, that's such a great question, and I'm glad you brought that up, because cortisol levels directly impact blood glucose values also. They go both ways. So, in this situation, it's like the vicious cycle, and the cortisol that is being released will rise the blood glucose values anyway. So, and that happens for people whether you're insulin resistant or not. So that's the interesting thing, is that the cortisol is a stimulant for glucose elevations, regardless of whether you're insulin resistant or not. So, so somebody could be non-insulin resistant, or, and living with this adrenal version of PCOS and having high blood glucose. So one of the strategies is in managing blood glucose in general is managing stress, and, taking really great care of yourself through things like sleep, setting up strong sleep habits, managing stress well, so that you're, getting your exercise in, you're getting your self-care time in, so that, what level, so cortisol levels can start to come back down a little bit more into range. That's one strategy for this particular, form of PCOS. The other thing is having a routine, where you're adding in tools to help reverse insulin resistance, sticking with a consistent, like building consistency in the habits. So, starting maybe with breakfast and then lunch and then dinner. And then we recommend adding in tools like even intermittent fasting that will help also contribute to reversing insulin resistance. And then adding in exercise, which we know is, shown to not only reverse insulin resistance, but just can lead to better feeling, overall well-being, feeling better. And then adding in other types of self-care, and including a sleep habits, really building strong sleep habits. If there's anything that we're learning right now about self-care and taking care of ourselves and protecting ourselves in general, it's that sleep is really, really important to reset. It aids in reducing inflammation. When you have proper sleep, in your body and your tissues in your body can actually do the restorative work that it needs to do. It's going to minimize inflammation in your body. It's going to allow your body to work more in sync with itself. So, sleep habits are really important to build for that.
Definitely. I feel people don't prioritize sleep as much as they should. People often think that it's not important, but there's like loads of research that show, even having 5 hours of sleep can decrease your insulin sensitivity. So it's just like it should really be a priority in anybody's life, and
Absolutely.
not, people should have a good sleep hygiene routine, not being on their phones or on the computer too late with all that blue light. It is definitely really important to make it a priority in your whole life, your lifestyle routine. It's definitely important.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Even that, it can cause our inflammation. So I feel like there's this whole research that shows inflammation can cause insulin resistance, and insulin resistance can cause inflammation. It's like everything is like connected.
All connected.
Yeah. With that and high cortisol, all of this stuff is like all together. So you kind of have to, like women with PCOS need to focus on aspects.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, higher levels of cortisol will lead to weight gain. And then you've got insulin resistance building. It's all connected. And one of the reasons that I really like the way that we teach these lifestyle habits is that we put the focus on the insulin resistance. So, we really target that as the key focus. and then the ways it shows up in your body. So each person's very individual that way. How is insulin resistance showing up for you? What types of things are going on inside your body? And we really keep the focus on the insulin resistance, which when you're in the process of reversing that and you start to notice changes in all the different biomarkers, it helps to really find that the connection of what's happening inside your body. You're like, oh, my lipids are getting better, my cholesterol is getting better. Well, that's my heart. And my blood glucose is getting better. Well, that's my diabetes. And, and my, it's, so you start noticing things that are happening throughout the process. And so it's nice. It's sort of like insulin resistance makes it really compact and like really targetable in that way.
Yeah. I feel like it is great that you really just focus on that, like with PCOS, that root cause of insulin resistance, rather than for like a lot of people, like when you go to a doctor, it's just like, cut carbs, lose weight, go on the birth control pill, exercise more, like all this kind of stuff. And it's just like, it's never, right, let's take a second. Why are your hormones out of balance? Like really delve in and realize, okay, it's insulin resistance, and do stuff to help that condition, that cause. And I feel like it's just so frustrating sometimes because you just get this standardized information. It's just like, it doesn't work. Stop telling me this.
Yeah, I know. And it hasn't been working for years. And, and in diabetes health too, the same thing. They're being, people with diabetes are being given the same information they were given 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, and it wasn't working then and it's not working now. And the reason is that nobody, it's the world that we're in right now is very medicated. It's to take this medicine to manage the symptom. High blood glucose is a symptom. It's not the actual cause, right? The cause is the insulin resistance. The high blood glucose is a symptom. And so when you're given medication to treat the symptom, you're never really getting to what's causing it, and that's the root of it, and that's insulin resistance. And it's so encouraging. I spent so many years working with women in various different times of their lives. Some right after they had a baby. Some women were prenatal, like I've done high risk OB, I worked in a fertility clinic. I've seen women with so many different conditions, at different stages of their fertility and what their goals were. And I love that I can now take that step back, because I've taken a step out of that direct world to work with mastering diabetes. And now we're sort of doing the pre-work for women to then go to their doctor and say, hey, now my A1C's improved. I think it's time to start working towards pregnancy, and it's very hopeful, it gives women a lot of power in their hands that they may not be getting from their healthcare team. And it's just a really exciting way to work, to help women put their health in their hands and get the power back.
Yeah, I agree. It's great now that there's so many people empowering women, and just in general, people who are looking to take back control of their health, that they now have this information that they can go, right, I've learned this, there's this research that says this, how about we try it, instead of, just taking a pill or something. And it's not like, I'm not like completely bashing medication. I feel like there is, a time and a place for it. But I feel like we need to potentially, find that balance between, okay, if you're on medication, or if, let's say, you're on the birth control pill, do those lifestyle and dietary and lifestyle changes in combination. So alongside taking something, you're doing the work on the inside, rather than just like hoping in that a pill would, fix everything, because it never really does. It can be some kind of support, but even like the birth control pill never really addresses the root cause. In a way, kind of like can cause insulin resistance, it causes inflammation, it causes all this stuff that ends up can cause PCOS and hormonal imbalances. So it's like, yeah, we just need to be delving deep, addressing the root causes, getting tests done. I have one question. It's a low-fat plant-based diet. What's the ratio of, like, how low is the fat? How much fat are you kind of consuming?
Okay, so in our program in reversing insulin resistance, we recommend a diet that contains 70 to 80% carbohydrate, 10 to 15% of calories from protein, and 10 to 15% of your calories from fat. And, one of the interesting things is that we've been told that women, we need fat for various reasons in our bodies, right? Like for hormone balance or for, weight control or whatever. There's so many reasons that women are told we need fat for our hair and our skin. And it's true. We're not a no fat approach. We are we teach you how to look at the food that you're eating so that you can log it and learn how many, like what the macronutrient breakdown is, so that you're within that 10 to 15% range for your dietary fat. Now, there's not a lot of nutrition studies specifically that says, women should get this much fat in their diet for any number. There's not a lot of great nutrition research about that, except there are recommendations for times like during pregnancy. So when you're following, but what we do have are long-term nutrition studies that show that people who maintain a diet that is, low or absent of animal protein or animal fat, and very, very high in fruits and vegetables and whole foods, that your life expectancy goes up, and your risk for chronic disease goes down, your risk for heart disease goes down, your risk for diabetes goes down. So, we look at those studies as the guide. And when you're eating a low-fat plant-based whole food diet, it's a 10 to 15% of total calories from fat, and that's what we recommend. Okay,
so yeah, like you said, obviously fat is important for creating our hormones. So, fat, the cholesterol creates our steroid hormones. So obviously, when you're not saying like completely low fat, what on the plant-based diet, what are some fat sources? Like, where would you get your fats from for people who might be wanting to know?
Yeah. So we have the way that we look at food is we have them categorized in red light, yellow light, and green light foods. The red light foods are the foods that we recommend to avoid, and those are things that are animal products, refined products, oil of any kind, any of those highly refined products, which are really just going to contribute to inflammation in your body, contribute to insulin resistance. So that's the red light category. Yellow light category is plant-based foods that tend to be higher in fat, which when it comes to insulin resistance can contribute to higher blood glucose values. So those are foods like avocado, nuts, seeds, soybeans, coconut. These are like the higher fat plant-based foods. And we say to minimize your eating those foods, because again, a small amount can go a very long way. So, 1 tablespoon of, let's say, chia seeds is 4 grams of fat. And when you're looking at your total grams over the course of 24 hours, to keep your percentage between 10 to 15%, usually that means that you're going to fall between 20 and 30 grams per day. And so, 1 tablespoon of chia seeds is 4 grams. That's like, a good portion of your daily, if you're aiming for 20 to 30 grams, it's a good portion of that. So those are the foods that we say to minimize intake of. And then the green light foods are foods that we say that are like eat in abundance. And believe it or not, these are foods that will contain a proportion of carbohydrate, protein, and fat. So every time you're eating a fruit or even a vegetable or a whole grain or a legume, it's sometimes it's hard to imagine this, but there is actually small amounts of fat in every single one of those foods. Fruit tends to have the lowest, and then vegetables and whole grains and beans. So they sort of step up a little bit more with each, the more dense the food. But you can easily, if you're eating a variety of these foods, you can easily meet the 10 to 15% range each day without even adding any yellow light foods. And I do that pretty regularly. Like I log my food, and I'll see, especially when I eat more beans, the more beans you eat, they tend to be a good source of, the green light fat to, keep that in range. And it's true, fat is an important macronutrient. Like we do not deny the importance of fat And it's just, until you actually see the numbers, it's really hard to imagine. But once you start logging your food and you see where it's coming from in the breakdown, it's so eye-opening. It's so amazing, because then you can actually have some real numbers to put to this, you know. And then if you do add in other foods, you can see, oh, okay, well, I see, like, you know, I added those nuts or the seeds or the avocado, and how did that change the meal? How did that turn that meal possibly from a low-fat meal to potentially a higher fat meal? And that's, you know, how we would sort of, like, you get to be like a detective, a food detective.
So do people who start out following the plant-based diet use a glucometer to track their blood sugar levels after each meal to get an idea of how things affect them, just, you know, as that extra data?
Yeah, it's a really helpful way to learn just how the foods are affecting you. We say if you wanted to just get a baseline for a couple days, check pre-meal, and then 2 to 3 hours after your meal to see where it is after you've had a chance to digest and let your body sort out the food a little bit. So that's a standard post-meal check. And it is a really good way to see, you know, which foods are impacting your glucose. Because if you eat something that's more refined, let's say, or something from the, you know, that yellow light category, it's a really good way to make that connection. Oh, well, that made my blood glucose go much higher than I was expecting.
Okay, interesting. The other thing, but this kind of topic, this kind of question is like a big debate, and I feel like we've kind of put it to bed. But then, what are some of the high protein plant-based foods that people can focus more on to hit their protein intake?
Okay. So again, every whole food that you're going to eat, it all has some amount of protein. So that's the good news. Like, every time you're eating a whole food, you're eating some protein. And the easiest thing to do, again, is to just log your food to see what foods are going to bring you the most protein. Legumes tend to be very high in protein. So lentils, beans, chickpeas, those are a great source of protein. Whole grains are another great source of protein. So if you're eating a meal, let's say with, you know, black beans and brown rice, you're going to, you know, see a nice amount of protein just from that one meal. Vegetables, all vegetables contain a small amount of protein. Fruits also include protein. They're going to be a little bit lower. But again, if you're getting a variety of whole foods every day, if you're starting out eating fruits, moving your way into some whole grains and legumes in the middle of the day, getting into some really nice vegetables for dinner, that's a really great strategy to, you know, make sure you're getting a nice variety of foods to add protein into your diet. In terms of protein, the amount we need every day is much less than what we really expect. And again, until you log it and see how much you're actually getting, it's very interesting. Most women need somewhere between 35 to 50, depending on, you know, your weight, and also depending on your activity level. But there is a calculation for that. It's pretty easy to calculate. You take your weight in kilograms and multiply it by 0.8. And that's your grams of protein. And it's very easy when you know that information to then log your food. And you're like, oh, okay, I see how many grams of protein I need. And oh, I met that today. And I met that yesterday. And I met that the day before. So, you know, I like to see the data. I like to see the numbers. So for me, you know, I tried it out for a while. When I first went to a plant-based diet, I wasn't food logging when I first changed my diet. And I just got curious. I was like, because people were asking me those kinds of questions, you know, and I was like, well, do you know how much, I never ever thought about how much protein I got ever in my life before I switched to a plant-based diet. And I didn't really think about it that much when I did switch. But then I was like, well, how would I find that out? So I just started, you know, tracking my food and getting an idea of what was in each serving of everything I ate. And it was so eye-opening, because not only could I see the protein, I saw, you know, the fat and the carbohydrates, and also all the wonderful micronutrients, vitamins and minerals and things that were, you know, so abundant in whole foods.
Before I move on to like the part B of the question is, do you lot recommend taking a protein powder, like a plant-based protein powder? Is there one? Do you recommend it? If so, is there a specific like, because there's like rice protein, hemp protein, is there a specific one that you lot would say, yeah, this form of plant-based protein's the best, let's say?
Yeah. Yes. So for some people, protein powder can be really helpful for stabilizing blood glucose after a high carbohydrate meal, especially when you're more insulin resistant. So let's say you're eating a fruit bowl and you notice your blood glucose goes up, you could add some protein powder to help stabilize your blood glucose a little bit after a high fruit or a high carbohydrate meal. We also recommend it if you're really hungry between meals. Sometimes adding that protein powder can actually help with maintaining, satisfied feeling after a fruit breakfast to get you to lunch. So that's another reason if you don't want to add another meal in the middle of the morning or a snack, something like that. So those are reasons that we do recommend using a protein powder. And then there are also some people who really do, especially people who are doing significant weight training, and they're maybe training for something, even something competitive. Some people who do really need to build muscle and put muscle on, the protein powder can be very helpful. And we use and recommend one called hemp. It's hemp, yeah, is the name of it. It's strictly hemp protein powder, no additives. That's what we recommend. I know there are some pea powders on the market that have no added sugar. Just check to make sure there's no added sugar, there's no added oil, no added preservatives. You want just a clean protein powder from a plant source, like hemp, yeah. And I forget the name of the pea protein, but there is one without any additives. So
yeah, I've tried the hemp protein. It wasn't that nice.
Yeah, I don't really love it. I know.
Really
It's
bad.
yeah. No.
I used to put it in my smoothies, but you can still kind of taste it.
Yeah.
I'm just like, I've always been looking for a good plant-based
Yeah.
protein powder, because sometimes it's just like, because I have like I mix up with like collagen protein. I don't have like because I feel like it's just, I just like to add that in. But
Sure.
but yeah, I've always been looking for like a plant-based one, because I like to just have a mix of things. So I'm always like still looking. It's like, can someone like recommend a good, nice tasting plant-based protein? It's like so bad.
So funny.
But yeah, all right. So moving on to like so with women, obviously we go through the menstrual cycle. Is there a like? Is it different for for women who are tracking insulin resistance when they're going through the whole menstrual cycle?
Absolutely. So, our hormones direct our menstrual cycle, and insulin resistance is more pronounced under the influence of certain hormones, in particular progesterone. And progesterone shows up mid-cycle to help you with ovulation. And so at that point, a lot of women will experience a higher degree of insulin resistance. And if you're monitoring your blood glucose, you may even start to see a spike in your blood glucose at that point. And then things stabilize a little bit for the next week or so. And then all of a sudden you end up with another surge of progesterone right before menstruation. And a lot of women, again, that's another time that they notice, oh my gosh, my blood glucose, my fasting is much higher than usual. I can't come down, I'm not coming down after meals. So blood glucose monitoring during these times is actually one of the number one kind of keys for that, that you can really understand what's happening. The interesting thing is that then on day maybe 2 of the cycle, blood glucose levels come right back down again because progesterone starts to drop again. So it's a really interesting thing to track. If you do have a blood glucose monitor and can track that, it's super interesting to watch that over the course of many months. And I've worked with many women who they'll do it for 1 month, and then we have some tips and tricks on how to avoid those elevations and that unmanaged blood glucose in those couple of days, and they apply the tools and they can break that sort of what I call situational insulin resistance. And it basically, when you're the way I see it is, when you're living with insulin resistance, it's sort of that's the baseline, right? And then you have things like a stressful event, and all of a sudden there's a higher degree of insulin resistance, or you'll have menstruation happen, and then you have a higher degree of insulin resistance, or things that maybe you can't work out for a couple of days, and all of a sudden you have a higher degree of insulin resistance. So those are situational, it's what I call situational insulin resistance. And ovulation and menstruation are two of those times where that shows up. And when you track it over time, you can then break the cycle, which is even better.
Interesting. Didn't know that.
Yeah.
So what are some of the things that women can do during the menstrual cycle to help with those spikes?
Yeah. So the first thing is what I call like the 1-2 punch, which is the second you notice your blood glucose has gone up, maybe you're feeling different symptoms, you're not feeling yourself, perform an intermittent fast. Just stop everything and drop into an intermittent fast. And if you've never fasted before, we've got great resources and tools. We do webinars on this topic often. It's a topic we really care about because it's so powerful in reversing insulin resistance. You can use it for long-term reversal of insulin resistance and for short-term in these situations. So the first thing I recommend is drop into a fast and just start a 24-hour fast at that point. And then from there, when you resume eating, eat mostly raw whole foods. So foods from our green light list that are primarily raw or lightly steamed. Because when you eat those foods that are intact and you're getting tons of fiber, tons of minerals, vitamins and minerals, all of those foods are going to help with the inflammation in your body and will help with the insulin resistance and will feed you with a much, basically you can kind of feed yourself out of that temporary insulin resistance.
Interesting. So the other thing, now that you mentioned intermittent fasting, I feel like this is another huge topic in the PCOS community, and there's loads of research to show that it can help reduce insulin levels. Would you, however, on the other kind of spectrum, on the other kind of hand is, obviously, women with PCOS who have high cortisol kind of problems, would you kind of still suggest someone who has those kind of problems to follow intermittent fasting because it could potentially cause, problems? So I don't know, what's your opinion?
From the stress. Well, I think this is one of those things you can maybe a little different for each person individually. We don't always know people's cortisol levels in our program. So some people could be living with some sort of adrenal issue, insufficiency, and have high cortisol levels, and we wouldn't necessarily know that. And it is a part of our regular program. So we don't recommend prolonged fasting. We recommend short-term intermittent fasting, which is either for 16 hours or 24 hours. And so what somebody in that situation might benefit from, rather than putting that sort of not just the mental stress of a 24-hour fast, but perhaps a 16-hour fast. And that way you're fasting during specific times of the day and you're only eating during specific times of the day. So 16-8 is what we would recommend for somebody in that situation.
Okay, interesting. So kind of let's maybe touch on a little bit more about what more of like your tools and tips for reversing insulin resistance. Is there anything else? Kind of obviously talked about how the plant-based diet is predominantly, the approach you recommend. Is there anything else that women with PCOS could do to help their insulin resistance?
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about it before, but exercise is so important. In our program, reversing insulin resistance includes food, it includes the fasting, and it includes exercise. And, when you're regularly exercising, you will see an improvement in your blood glucose. Exercise is phenomenal for so many reasons, but one of them is that when you exercise, you actually make room to absorb more glucose from your blood into your muscles. So, especially when you're performing resistance training. So, getting into a routine, and if it's something you haven't done before, starting a new routine where you're adding exercise in, knowing that it's going to help you reverse your insulin resistance, can be very motivating. And especially if it's going to help you with your PCOS symptoms, and, down the road, sort of like the down the line effect of exercise is so powerful. And even just walking, especially walking after meals, that's a really nice way to burn some of that glucose after you're eating, especially if you see those post-meal elevations. So exercise after a meal, as simple as walking, can be really, really helpful for that too. So absolutely adding exercise in. The other thing is making sure you're getting adequate vitamin D. Vitamin D is becoming, there's a lot more attention to vitamin D right now with immune support and other factors that vitamin D influences. But one of them is actually that it does help with glucose uptake at the cellular level. And so it's playing a role. And there have been studies that have shown that most people are vitamin D deficient these days. We don't spend a lot of time in the sun anymore, for skin reasons, and especially after the winter, coming out of the winter. So if you haven't had your vitamin D level checked, have it checked. And if you're low, supplementation is a really important part of a whole food plant-based diet as well, because it's not readily available through the food. So something to really consider if you're not spending time in the sun.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like vitamin D is, women with PCOS, the research has been showing that they're deficient in vitamin D. But I feel like even just in general, if you're not living in a hot country where there's like a lot of sun, and I feel like in London, I feel like we've had some good weather recently, but obviously it never lasts so long. You never will get a really good summer. And especially now with the whole lockdown, I feel like everyone's inside more. So I feel like supplementing with good vitamin D is really important. Is there any supplements, that one on the topic of supplements, is there any other supplements that can help with insulin resistance? And
not necessarily with insulin resistance in particular, but for when you're following a whole food plant-based diet, it is important to have some of your levels checked, your vitamin levels. B12 is one of them. I'm sure you've probably brought that up before. And vitamin D, that's another one that it can get overlooked because it's not a common one. It's one we don't think of. Vitamin D is often fortified in dairy products or in cereals and things. It's not really very readily available, except we absorb it from the sun, and our skin does a really good job of synthesizing it and sending it to our body. So those are the two that we recommend having routinely checked when you're following a plant-based diet. But really, again, when it comes to what supplements to take, first I really recommend checking in with your food log and see what nutrients you're getting, because you'll be surprised at how many minerals and vitamins you're getting every day, and start with those. One other mineral that's really important is iodine. And it's available you can get it easily in sea vegetables, but it's not one that's measured very easily, and it's very difficult to have it checked. You can't really get that level checked. And so making sure you're adding in some like sea vegetables, like seaweed or dulse flakes, things like that, just adding them in is really important. And that's an important one for skin, hair, and nails. And so for women especially, that's an important, that can be very important. I've heard women who have unfortunately felt they've been iodine deficient and lost hair and things like that. So that's something also to consider.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. But yeah, on the topic of the whole exercise, I think exercise is definitely important. And I feel like people focus so much on the gym and high intensity interval training. I feel HIIT is really important. I feel like because obviously it activates insulin and gets all the glucose into the muscle to be used, so it's not like floating around in the blood. So, but then again, I feel like people focus so much on that aspect when even going for a walk it can be beneficial anyway. So I feel people need to balance it out and not be so fixated on I need to go to the gym, I need to run, I need to do this, I need to do that. And even resistance training is great as well. So women need to be going to the gym and lifting some weights.
Yeah, right.
and even yoga, you mentioned you do yoga, and I think that's great as well. Especially like when I used to do hot yoga, that was that was a really good workout. Definitely people should give things a go and try some of that out. Is there any other tips or tools that you would recommend?
Let's see here. Basically for anybody who's going through lifestyle change, if you are making changes to your diet, if this is something that you're interested in, one of the things I talked about earlier is like having a routine, having a schedule, but also have fun with the food. Have a good time having fun with creating new recipes, learning to prepare new foods. it's a lot of fun. And I think sometimes we get so caught up in the, oh, I've got to make these meals. I have, like I have to eat the right foods for my insulin resistance or for my health. And it's a really good motivator. And it's a really good way to get into whole food nutrition. But it can also become consuming. So have fun with the food, go join a group on social media. There's so many wonderful groups out there for plant-based eaters. I'm in one for like plant-based Instant Pot people, and people exchange recipes and ideas and, hey, I've got this ingredient. What do I do with it? Because change can be a little overwhelming, as we all know. And so when you can sort of look for ways to bring fun into the change, it can maybe help to reduce the tension of change. And there's lots of great resources out there for whole food eating these days, plant-based eating these days. It's really, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I like how in the Mastering Diabetes book, how you have tons of recipes and you explain when you're trying to, I don't know what the word is. That word's just gone. Lost my. When you're, let's just say, going to making the switch, essentially, making the switch to plant-based diet. I like the way you've got like it's all broken down. So, like you said, the first you just change one meal on one day, so breakfast, and then you change that, and then until you feel comfortable, you move on to like the next kind of thing. So I feel like that's a good way to make the switch, so it's not so overwhelming and scary, and you're not, you don't know like what to do. You feel like you wake up and you're just like, okay, today I'm throwing out all my old ingredients and just making the switch, and it's just like you're not fully, I feel like, mentally prepared for this whole new change, because essentially it's a big change to change your diet completely. So I feel like that is a good way to ease into it.
Yes, absolutely. And it is, and especially when you keep it really simple, keep it simple. We are a very fruit-friendly program. When you keep it simple, it makes it more fun, it makes it more manageable. So like fruits for breakfast, more fruits for lunch, maybe make a nice salad for dinner, and you're going to find so much more nutrition from that than it's hard to imagine how much is in those foods, but it's really keep it simple and have fun. Those are
I
feel
like, definitely. I feel people, because this is the other thing, I feel that people often are so quick to not focus so much on food, and they often look outside for to help PCOS, for example. And if you just really go back to basics and back to the food, like food is medicine. So I feel like we need to focus so much more on going back to basics and focusing on the nutrients in our food. And there's tons of important vitamins and minerals in fruits and vegetables and beans and all this stuff. So I feel like people get so stressed and overwhelmed with so I just feel like going back to basics, it's like the first thing I always say to clients is like, go back to basics, focus on your food, and just try and eat more more vegetables, more fruit, and just focus every day on trying a different recipe, trying a different ingredient. Like go to the store and find something that you've never tried before and just cook with it. And it's just so many foods and so many ingredients that it's exciting to just try new things instead of being like focused on eating a flavorless, bland, like grey plate of food. It's just like it's exciting to have a colourful plate of food.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So how can our listeners connect with you? Where can they find you on what social media platforms? And like we mentioned, the Mastering Diabetes book, where can they find the book as well?
So you can find me with Mastering Diabetes. The Mastering Diabetes book is available all over the place. It's on Amazon. It's available as an audiobook. It's available as for Kindle and Nook as well. And on our website at masteringdiabetes.org. We have an amazing team. If you're interested in connecting with me, you can reach out to the support team that's on the website. We also have an Instagram, Mastering Diabetes, and Facebook page. So you can follow along with all of our fun. We post tons of recipes on all of our social media accounts. We host regular webinars. We do tons of education, and actually I'm really excited because I'm in the middle of building a sort of pregnancy and women's health focused course or part of the program. And so we have so many great resources for women at any time of their lives. And it's a, we do a lot of education. So, come check us out.
Awesome. Yeah. I love the recipes and the social media, Instagram. You post tons of great things. I definitely check the Mastering Diabetes Instagram, social media, and the website. I have them all linked in the show notes. So I highly recommend following. Is there any final bit of advice you maybe want to wrap up for our listeners? Like, I don't know, a bit of motivation, some inspiration, I don't know, something.
Of course. Yeah. Well, actually, I think that there's hope out there. There's answers. One of the things, I've been a nurse for almost 20 years, and I've worked with tons of women, and this role that I have right now, coaching women, working with women directly, it's so exciting to me because it just provides so much hope and to, like we said earlier, get the power in your hands. Your health is in your hands. And when you start learning about how to nourish yourself from the inside and what the benefits you start to feel right away, it just starts to snowball into this big ball of hope. And it's really exciting to be a part of that. And I love the results that we see and the support that we can provide people through our program. So there may be answers out there that you haven't necessarily experienced. So definitely, you're in a good place here to learn and explore, and that's a really good place to start. So
awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to come back on the podcast and speak more about insulin resistance and what your recommendations, what your experience, and just shed some more light on this condition that's ever growing and really important to be addressing and focusing on to prevent any further risk factors. So yeah, thank you so much for taking the time. Really enjoyed chatting with you again and learning from you again. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.